Which class are you talking about? Okay. I may take teach 332 in the summer. I'm not sure yet.
Now look, okay,
I can't go summer class.
that insurance class, why is it a summer only?
It's always been that way. But it's online, so
But still, that's so much extra tuition for me since I'm out of state.
that's true.
Is there any way that like,
Like 3,000.
yeah, like is there any way that like that could be like a, you know that one class that you're saying is like a studies class, like could I do that in there?
You just you'd have to talk to Dr. Durr about that
Talk to her,
and see. Yeah.
talk to them about and say why this class 8 a.m. That's just unnecessary.
Some people like to get started early. I'm not one of them, but some people like to. Yeah, I don't know. You just have to talk to him. I really don't know. Hey, you can change to the commercial bank management option.
Do I still take tax though?
No,
Oh, that sounds pretty great.
no. You take. We have some good classes in that option.
Tax sounds pretty
Yeah, no, there's no accounting 302 in there.
I just might do that if people change this class.
All right, let's go ahead and finish up with chapter 6 today. One thing that I wanted to point out is you have a quiz opening today covering chapter 6, the calculations, divine calculations from chapter 6. So we'll finish everything that you need for that quiz today. And if you go down, you'll see quiz number 3. It opens today at 2 o'clock for both this section and the online section. And it closes Monday night at 11:59 p.m. So you've got 4 days to do a 5-question quiz. You get 30 minutes per attempt, and you get 3 attempts. So it should be, I think, for most of you, pretty easy points. And then we have 1 quiz left, and keep in mind your highest 3 quiz grades count. And yes, if you make 100 on all 4 quizzes, I'm only counting 3 of those. Okay? So I'll pat you on the back. That's good. Good job. 100.
How about if we get 100 on all 4 quizzes, like the 4th quiz goes to
That is creative. It is. And it's not going to work, but it's creative. Now, tell you what. Get your PhD, you stand up here, you want to do that, man, I'll let you go at it, okay? That's the great thing about when you teach a class. You can remember what you liked and didn't like from the classes you took, and then you can change them. I mean, that's the fantastic thing. The problem is you've got to go through 10 years of school to get there, so that's kind of the drawback. But it's a good option, though. It's just, you get 3 100s on the quiz, you're in good shape, okay? There will be another, as I said, there will be another extra point opportunity, which is November 15th at 4 o'clock in the stables at the Kerr Center. If you can't make that, which hopefully some of you can, because we'd like to have a really good turnout, then if you, again, just like we've done, if you've done anything else regarding job training, academic meetings or speakers or whatever on campus, shoot me an email. If you're in the online class, send me an email, and I will give you the 5 additional points. So that's 2 5-point opportunities. And the second 5 points will be added to the second test. It's at 4 o'clock, November 15th, in the stables of the Kerr Center. And there's going to be some really good door prizes too. So if nothing else, show up for some free stuff. You might win some free stuff. So you've seen the good stuff, haven't you? All right, so let me remind you, I'm sure I don't probably have to remind you, but Tuesday is Election Day. So the university is closed for Election Day. There will be no class. Unless some of you if you just really want to meet and have class on Tuesday, we could, but I don't think you want to. I don't think you want to. So, so you're off Tuesday, and then we've have class, so we don't have class again until next Thursday after today. All right, so we left off in chapter 6. We were talking about bonds and bond valuation. We said that bonds basically are a form of debt, and it can be issued by corporations or by governments. So it can be the federal government, the state government, a county government, the city government. And bonds typically are long-term. They have a maturity of 10 to 30 years. They pay interest payments. So basically what it is, and I had a couple of good conversations with students after class on Tuesday that to kind of solidify what we're talking about. A bond is simply when a government entity or corporation borrows money from you. So if you purchase one of their bonds, you are loaning them money for a certain period of time. And while you own their bond, because you're using their money, they're going to make interest payments to you. So the cash flows associated with the bond are two types. The first is the interest payments, and the second is the par value or the face value of the bond that you're going to receive back when the bond matures in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever. Now, you'll see in some of the examples that we work through, you may have a bond that matures in 3 years or 2 years or 4 years. That's because that might have been originally a 30-year bond that was issued 26 years ago, but it only has 4 years left until maturity. So we can still value that bond. We can put a valuation on that. And if you want to purchase a bond, because different investors have different investment horizons, if you want to purchase a bond that matures in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years or whatever, you can do that, because the bond market, just like the stock market, is a huge entity. As a matter of fact, in terms of dollars, the bond market is pretty much as big as the stock market. I mean, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of bonds being bought and sold every single day. Now, we don't typically talk about it as much because, as I said on Tuesday, bonds tend to be a little bit boring. But if you want some excitement, there are some bonds, which we'll talk about in a little while, called junk bonds or speculative grade bonds that can be a little bit more exciting because they have a lot higher return associated with them. Now, the trade-off is, for that excitement, the trade-off is the possibility of your issuer of the bond going bankrupt and you not receiving your interest payments and or your par value. So again, there's a kind of a risk-reward trade-off there. Now, we talked about valuing bonds, and we simply said that that is the value of a bond, or the price of a bond, is the present value of the future cash flows, and that's the interest payments and the par value. Today, we're going to change gears just a little bit, and we're going to calculate yield to maturity. And you'll see the definition of yield to maturity here. And I think the name pretty much gives it away. It says the yield to maturity, or the YTM, is the rate of return earned on a bond purchased at a specific price and held to maturity. So it's the annual yield or return that you earn on your bond investment. Now, to calculate the yield to maturity, we need, again, 4 inputs, just like we did with pricing a bond. The only difference is we're calculating the I/Y, we're given the price of the bond. And one thing that I want to point out to you is the present value, or the price of the bond, has to be entered as a negative number. And that's really, really important. And if not, you'll see an error 5 message on your calculator, and automatically you're thinking, wait a minute, I didn't enter the present value as a negative number. So we'll go through an example of this. Now, with your financial calculator, you actually probably don't realize how fortunate you are. If you're doing this by hand, and you can do it by hand and get an estimate of the yield to maturity, this is how I learned how to do it, okay, back in the dark ages. And it would literally take 15 to 20 minutes minimum to calculate one yield to maturity problem. And that's because you had so many calculations that you had to make. It was trial and error, so normally you had to work through all the calculations 2, 3, 4, 5 times to come up with an approximation of the yield to maturity. With your financial calculator, you plug your 4 variables in, compute the I/Y, and you've solved this in 10 seconds. So it literally saves you tons of time. So these are our inputs. And this is what we're trying to do, actually. So here we've got a 10-year bond, pays a 9% coupon annually, so that's 99% of $1,000, $90 per year. So that's what we see here. The future value is $1,000, and is currently selling for $887. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the interest rate or the rate of return or the yield that would cause the present value of these future cash flows, the interest payments and the par value, once we discount them and find the present value and add them up, we're trying to find the rate that causes this side of the equation to equal 887. So you can see that could be a little bit difficult if you're trying to do it by hand, because if you're trying to do it by hand, basically what you're faced with, this is the same thing, okay, I've just got this set up in present value format. So what you're doing is you're looking for this R sub D, and that stands for the return or the required return on debt, which is bonds. So what we would do if we were doing this by trial and error, we would just plug in an interest rate here. So we look at this and we go, okay, let's try 12%. And so you would have your calculations, you would have 1 plus 0.12, and you would have that for all of your calculations. Now this is a 10-year bond, so you would have 10, actually the par value, 11 calculations. You would go through the math and add them all up to see if does this side of the equation equal 887. Well, it's not going to. So then you have to, based on the number that you have, increase or decrease your interest rate. And you try it again. And you work through this 2 or 3 times. And again, you can get an estimation of the yield to maturity. It's not going to be exact. With your financial calculator, you would get the exact amount. Now, your inputs for your financial calculator are listed here. So again, we need 4 inputs. So we've got the N, the present value, which is negative, the payment, and the future value. And we're calculating the I/Y, which is the yield to maturity. So if we bring this up for our financial calculator, now I'm going to go through the clear process. And we enter this information. Again, it doesn't matter what order we put them in. So I'm going to put in 10 as my N. Now, the 887 is negative. So we're going to put in 887. We're going to make it negative here in the bottom right-hand corner. Okay, the little plus minus key. And then we'll press the present value key. The payment is 90. And the future value is 1,000. We have our 4 inputs. We want to compute the 5th, which in this case is the I/Y. So we'll press our compute button in the top left-hand corner and the I/Y. And it tells us, it matches what we have here. It tells us that if we invest in this bond today for $887, hold it for 10 years until maturity, we're going to earn 10.91% per year on this bond. And that consists of 2 things. It consists of the interest portion of the yield and the capital gain portion of the yield, because we're buying this bond at a discount. We're buying it for $887, and it's going to rise to be worth $1,000 in 10 years. All right, so did everybody come up with 10.91% for yield to maturity? And does anybody need to borrow a calculator, by the way? I've got 3 up here if you need to borrow one. What happened to this side of my room? What's going on over here? I've just got the winners here, is that it? The others didn't show up? All right, I can tell it's getting late in the semester. As it gets closer and closer to Thanksgiving, the room starts becoming emptier and emptier, so that's okay. All right. Okay, so this is yield to maturity. Now, again, we talked about this yesterday a little bit. This is a really good study slide in terms of bond value behavior, so take a look at this. And basically what this says is, if the coupon rate on a bond is less than the required return, the bond is going to settle at a discount. That's less than its par value, which is normally less than $1,000. If the coupon rate is equal to the required return, the bond is going to sell at its par value, which is typically $1,000. And if the coupon rate is greater than its required return, the bond is going to sell at a premium or more than $1,000. And we talked yesterday about interest rates, and we said or Tuesday, there's a negative relationship between interest rates and bond prices. So if interest rates rise, the bond price will fall. If interest rates fall, the bond prices will rise. So that's what we discussed. You need to know that for the final exam. Now, based on this, let's practice. I'll give you just a second. Calculate, if you would, the yield to maturity for a bond that's priced at $1134.20, and everything else is the same as the previous slide, okay? So everything else is here. The 10 years to maturity, the payment is $90, the future value of $1,000, but the present value is now $1,134.20. And again, keep in mind the present value is a negative number. It has to be entered as a negative. Now, if you calculated the first one, all you have to do is simply go through and change the price of the bond. So if we're here, we put in $1,134.20, make it negative, press the present value key, and compute the I/Y. You will see that the yield to maturity on this bond is going to be 7.08%. Now notice that the yield to maturity on this bond is less than the coupon rate, because it tells us right here we're going to receive a 9% interest rate, a 9% interest payment each year for 10 years on our bond. So how can we possibly earn a yield of 7.08% if it tells us right there we're going to earn 9% interest on our bond? And when you all talk at once, I can't understand you, okay? What's happening with this bond? And I'll give you a hint. With the selling price of the bond. What? Okay, selling at a premium. So what this means is this bond is currently selling for $1,134.20. When it matures in 10 years, it's going to be worth $1,000. So you're going to lose automatically over 10 years $134.20. That's a capital loss. But notice this bond's interest rate is higher than the current market rate of interest, which we just calculated has to be 7.08%. So since we're earning a higher coupon rate or a higher rate of interest, it's offset by paying a premium for the bond, and so the total yield on the bond is equal to the interest rate portion of the yield, which is 9%, plus, or in this case, minus the capital loss yield. So we're going to lose $134.20. And so those two combined means we're going to earn exactly 7.08%, which should be the current market rate of interest for bonds of this risk level. No more and no less. So is that confusing enough to you? At least I got a head nod out of that. Okay, yes, okay, you're confused. Okay, I'm doing something right then. So let's keep going. All right. Now, we can confuse you a little bit more, because up to this point, we've been dealing with bonds that have annual coupon payments or annual interest payments, so once per year. And the reason we start there is because it's easier to work with an annual coupon bond. But in reality, most bonds pay interest semi-annually, so 2 times per year or every 6 months. It's actually a pretty easy thing to handle this if you have a semi-annual interest payment bond. We're going to make our changes manually. We're going to leave our calculator set to 1 payment per year, and we'll just enter the information just like we have and calculate the price of the bond. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply the years to maturity by 2, we're going to divide the required return or the yield to maturity or the market rate or what they call the nominal rate by 2. And we're going to divide the interest payment by 2. So this is what we would do to our inputs here. The future value is not affected. The present value is not affected. And so if we look at an example of this, and again, we're just going to make the changes manually, leave our calculator set to 1 payment per year. But if we take a look at an example of this, so here's a 10-year, 10% coupon, semi-annual bond. If the required return on the bond is 13%, notice we don't mention the future value, and so if the future value is not mentioned, we assume it's $1,000. Okay? So in this case, if we want to enter the information, so let me be sure to clear back out the zeros and then go through the clear process. Again, I'm going to leave my calculator set to 1 payment per year. So this is a 10-year bond, but what we're doing is essentially we're changing everything to 6-month increments. So we're going to multiply the 10 by 2, so N is going to be 20. Instead of 10 years, we now have 26-month time period. The 10% coupon, 10% of 1,000 is $100 interest payment per year, but we divide that by 2. So 100 divided by 2 is $50 every 6 months. So 50 is our payment. The required return is 13% per year, but if we divide that by 2, that's 13 divided by 2, which is 6.5% every 6 months. So that's the I/Y. And finally, the future value is $1,000, so we don't have to change that. So we've got our 4 inputs. In this case, we want to compute the present value or the price. So compute present value. And this bond should be selling for $834.72 today based on these conditions. The I/Y, that's going to be 13 divided by 2, which is going to be 6.5%. So does everybody see kind of where we're going with this? Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. You see one of these on the final exam, which you will see one of these on the final exam. This is for semi-annual. You'll probably see one of these on your quiz that you have this weekend, I think. Okay, now we can do the same thing with yield to maturity, but there is going to be one small adjustment here I want you to be aware of. So this says calculate the yield to maturity of a 10-year, 10% coupon bond, pays interest semi-annually if the current price is $892.17. Okay, so again, we can go through and we can calculate this. So if I bring up my calculator, so let me go through the clear process. It's a 10-year bond, but we multiply it by 2 because it's semi-annual interest. So 10 times 2 is 20, which is our N. 10% coupon, $100 per year. We divide that by 2, so the payment is $50. The future value of the bond, which is not mentioned, so we assume it's 1,000. And the present value of the bond is $892.17. Multiply and divide by 2. Yeah, for a semi-annual bond, you would multiply and divide by 2. Now, sometimes you may have a quarterly interest payment bond. So if you have a quarterly interest payment bond, you would simply multiply and divide by 4. Oh, this 10% of $1,000. And the present value, the $892.17, we're going to make that negative and enter that as our present value. So now I think I've entered all 4 variables. We want to compute the I/Y. And so we see this pops up on our calculator screen, and probably, I can't say for certain, but probably you're going to have, of your 4 answers, your 4 multiple choice answers, this is probably going to be answer A. And it's going to be staring you right in the face. And you're like, man, I'm so smart. There it is, 5.93% yield to maturity on this bond. There's only one small problem. The yield to maturity is always an annual rate of interest. We just calculated the 6-month yield on this bond. Because remember, we changed everything to 6-month increments. So if we want the actual yield to maturity, the annual rate, we have to take this number and multiply it by 2 to convert the 6-month rate to the annual yield to maturity. That answer will also be one of the 4 answers, but it's probably going to be further down the list. So remember, you will make a note in your, put a big star by it in your notes. With a semi-annual interest bond, and you're calculating yield to maturity, you have to multiply the solution by 2 to come up with the actual annual yield to maturity. Does that make sense to everybody, what we're doing? Because we converted everything to 6-month increments. The payment is the 10% coupon is 10% of $1,000 because it doesn't mention that it's $1,000 future value, so that's what we always assume. Okay? And then divide by 2. So it's 10% times 1,000, which is 100, divided by 2, which is 50. All right, so that's what we're talking about right here. Okay? Now that's just for a semi-annual interest payment bond. If you're calculating the yield to maturity on an annual interest payment bond, you don't have to do anything after you calculated the solution. It would be the 5.9352 multiplied by 2. So whatever that comes up to. 11.87. So 11.87%. Okay, now let's talk for a second. We're finished mostly with our calculations. I guess we are finished with our calculations. I want to talk for a minute about bond ratings because this is something it's received a lot of headlines over the last few years with our financial crisis. And if any of you decide to invest in bonds at some point in time, it's good to understand bond ratings. Now, what you see here on the left-hand side of the screen, they're bond rating agencies. These are independent third parties that go in and look at the financial health of a corporation issuing a bond or a government agency issuing a bond. And they're going to give it a rating. How likely is that bond to make its interest payments and its par value payment? So you've got Standard & Poor's, that's a rating agency. Fitch's is a rating agency. And Moody's is a rating agency. And you'll notice, typically, I mean, this is kind of how most of them do it. Now, they actually do break it down further, but for explaining this is good enough. You'll notice they go from AAA to AA to single A to triple B, and then they keep going, double B, single B, etc. AAA is the highest rating a bond can receive. So these are the safest bonds. So being the safest bonds, they're going to have the lowest interest rate associated with them because they're safer. They're less risky. So if they're less risky, they're going to pay a lower interest rate. You'll notice the difference between the rating agencies. These two use all capital letters. Moody's uses a capital A and 2 lowercase a's. They mean the same thing. It's just they're trying to differentiate themselves, so there's not a big difference. Then we go down to AA. Still a really good bond, but it's not quite AAA rated. It's a little bit riskier, so it's going to pay a little bit higher interest rate. Then we go to single A bonds. Then we go to triple B. Notice the first 4 categories are what's called investment grade bonds. Now that's an important distinction here because there are some entities, some businesses that can only invest in investment grade bonds. Your bank is one of those. Banks buy a lot of bonds. They buy a lot of government bonds. They buy a lot of local municipal bonds, but they have to buy investment grade bonds. Now, once we get below investment grade, you'll notice the term junk bonds. Another name for this is speculative grade bonds. That sounds a little better than junk bonds. And that is going to be the double B, the single B, the triple C, the double C, the single C, and it just keeps going down from there. Now, what you'll notice is, take a look at this. This is the percent of bonds by rating that default within 1 year, which means they stop making their interest payments, or within 5 years. So notice AAA rated bonds, the highest grade, the safest bonds, none of these defaulted within 5 years. That's pretty good. With AA, none of those defaulted within a year, and only 0.1% defaulted within 5 years. That's still a pretty safe bond. Then you go to single A, triple B, etc. Even double B rated bonds, there's not a huge default rate. Single B is getting a little bit higher, but notice the jump from single B to triple C. Notice the default rates. Over 25% of triple C rated bonds defaulted within 1 year, and over 35% defaulted within 5 years. So basically, I mean, you're taking a pretty big gamble if you invest in a triple C rated bond. But the trade-off is it's going to have a really high rate of return. It's going to have a really high yield on it because they have to pay investors a high yield or nobody's going to buy their bonds. So if we take a look at this, and again, the name junk bond kind of turns us off a little bit, and this sort of explains what I just talked about. These junk bonds, let's talk about investment grade. I won't talk about junk bonds for just a minute. This was kind of a development in the 1980s. There was a guy named Michael Milken who came up with, he didn't actually invent junk bonds, but he made a market for junk bonds. What that means is he developed a market where junk bonds could be bought and sold. He also sold a lot of junk bonds to people or companies that has no business investing in junk bonds. Retirement plans, some mutual funds, individuals who were retired on fixed incomes and they depended on the interest payments on the bonds as part of their income that they live off of. And so he sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth of junk bonds. And then the junk bond market crashed. And so you had thousands and thousands of people losing hundreds of millions of dollars because of what he told them about the safety of junk bonds. He represented them as something that they weren't. Okay, and that was people who really didn't have access to that. We didn't have the internet at that time, so you couldn't just research all of this stuff like you can now. Now, for doing this, Michael Milken actually went to prison. He was one of the few white-collar criminals that actually went to prison. He went to prison for, I want to say it was 5 years was his prison. He spent 5 years in prison. Now, it's estimated that Michael Milken made, and they're estimating, $300 million in profit from his part in the sale of all of these junk bonds. $300 million. And guess how much of that money the feds could find whenever they started looking for the money? None of it. Now, I'm not telling you this is right, okay? But if you do the math on this, $300 million in profit divided by 5 years in prison, that averages out to $60 million per year. Okay, you're in LeBron James territory in terms of your income. The problem is the ethical decision of is it worth it or not. Okay, probably not. But again, they've never found that money. And if you look him up now, you can Google Michael Milken. He's estimated now to be worth over $1 billion. So they never found the money. They fined him millions of dollars, but apparently they banned him from the investments industry, but apparently he's found other ways to make money since he got out of prison. So that's kind of one of the 1980s stories of junk bonds. And finally, a couple of ways that bonds can enter junk territory. You need to know these for the test, the final exams. You might want to write these down. One is what's called a fallen angel, and that's where a bond starts out its life as investment grade, but because of some some issue. Maybe it's an internal issue in the corporation. It might be a recession. Who knows what it is. But the bond is downgraded to junk status. And that's called a fallen angel. The other type is what's called an original issue junk bond. And that means this bond started its life as a junk bond. It's still a junk bond. And it's going to be a junk bond all of its life until it matures or until it defaults, whichever comes first. So if you're looking at these as investments, the one that I would look at as a possibility of an investment will be the fallen angel, because bonds can be downgraded, and if you understand the reason why it was downgraded, they can also be upgraded later if things improve. So maybe you can buy the bond at a low price, you're earning a high yield, it's upgraded, you have a safe investment, but you're earning a high yield on it. So that's an option. Okay, so fallen angels and original issue junk. And then here's a little section on bond raters. One of the problems related to the financial meltdown in 2008 is that a lot of bonds were improperly rated. The rating agency said they were safer than they really were. And so you had banks investing literally billions of dollars in these bonds. You had individuals investing billions of dollars in these bonds. They were supposed to be safe, they weren't. They went into default, they stopped making interest payments, banks lost a lot of money. We had over 500 bank closures for various reasons between 2008 and 2012. That's a lot of banks closing. Considering that in the previous 5 years, we probably had 20 banks fail total. Over 500 banks. And this is one of the reasons, is because of the incorrect bond rating. And finally, that is chapter 6. That is the bond chapter. The next chapter we're going to cover is chapter 7. You will enjoy it more than chapter 6. We're going to look at how to buy and sell stock. We're going to look at some actual stock prices as they're being traded. But you get to leave early today, okay? Enjoy your election day off. We will cover chapter 7 next Thursday. Remember your quiz this weekend, and I will see you in 1 week.